The soft hum of the kitchen filled the air, punctuated only by the occasional clink of utensils. Ava stirred the pot on the stove, her movements mechanical, comforting. The children's laughter echoed from the living room, a sound she had come to associate with the warmth of family, the kind of simple joy that made the world feel safe. She glanced at the clock. Liam should be home soon, and dinner would be ready. Just another evening in the rhythm of their lives. But tonight, something felt different. A quiet unease settled in her chest, uninvited but impossible to ignore. She couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside her little kitchen was beginning to shift. Ava's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. At first, she didn't think much of it. Probably just spam or a wrong number. She glanced down at the screen and froze. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated for a moment before tapping the message open. It was brief, but it made her heart skip a beat. Liam's been spending a lot of time with Clara lately. I know what you don't. Her pulse quickened. The words echoed in her mind. The message felt oddly intimate, almost mocking, as if the sender was playing with her. Who would send this? How did they know about her husband and Clara? Ava's fingers trembled as she read on, every word slicing through her like a sharp blade. I saw them last week. He kissed her in the parking lot behind her house. Not the first time. Her breath caught in her throat, and the room seemed to tilt as her eyes scanned the rest of the message. There was no mistaking it now. Liam, her husband, had been having an affair with Clara, her best friend, the one person she thought she could trust above all others. The betrayal hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in an ocean of disbelief and horror. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the pain, but the vivid image of Liam's kiss with Clara refused to leave. How could they do this to her? How long had it been going on? How many lies had she been living? The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison. Ava set the phone down on the counter, her mind racing. The children's voices in the living room, once comforting, now grated on her nerves. She could no longer focus on the mundane things that had once brought her peace. Each breath she took felt like it came from a different world. A world where the man she loved and the woman she trusted had shattered her reality. Her hands shook as she reached for the dish towel, only to drop it when her fingers went numb. She looked around the kitchen, the familiar space now foreign, almost hostile. The home she had built with Liam, the life they had created, felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She had to hold it together, for the children, for herself. But she didn't know how. The truth was suffocating, weighing down on her chest like an anchor she couldn't escape. Ava's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Disbelief that her own husband could betray her, that her best friend could cross that line. Anger, so much anger at the cruelty of their actions, at the lies they had fed her for months, maybe even years. And confusion about everything, about her marriage, about Clara, about herself. Her head throbbed and she clenched her fists, trying to contain the flood of emotions threatening to overtake her. How had she not seen it? How had she been so blind to the signs? I need answers, she whispered. But the words felt empty, hollow. What kind of answers could even make sense of this? The room seemed to spin as Ava sank down onto the kitchen chair. Her heart raced, the beat erratic, as if it too was trying to escape the nightmare. She looked down at the phone again, the message still on the screen. She had to be certain, but deep down she knew. The truth had already sunk in. Her marriage, the life she had spent years building, felt like a lie. Every smile, every laugh shared with Liam, every promise they'd made to each other now seemed hollow. a facade they had both worn to mask the deep cracks beneath. And Clara? The betrayal ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. Her best friend, the woman she had confided in, laughed with, cried with, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The ground beneath her shifted, the reality of her life crumbling into dust. Nothing would ever be the same again. Ava's days were a well-orchestrated routine, a rhythm she had mastered over the years. The early morning rush, getting the kids ready for school, preparing breakfast, and sending them off with a kiss. Then, the rest of her day unfolded quietly, filled with laundry, cleaning, and the occasional call with friends. But it was in the quiet moments, in the spaces between tasks, that she found a sense of purpose. She had always placed her family at the center of her life. Every decision she made was for them, for her husband Liam, and for their 2 children. Ava prided herself on creating a warm, loving home, a place where her family could feel safe and loved. Her love for Liam had always been the bedrock of their marriage. She believed with all her heart that their bond was unshakable. Yet, lately, there had been a shift. Small, barely noticeable moments where the connection between them seemed to fray. She pushed the thoughts aside, unwilling to admit that something might be wrong. It was just the stresses of life, she told herself. Surely it would pass. Liam had always been the life of the party. A successful businessman with a magnetic charm, he could walk into any room and have it lit up in an instant. People admired him, trusted him, and followed his lead. Ava had always been proud of him, proud of his achievements, proud of the man he was. But lately his success seemed to come at a cost. His hours at work had grown longer, his focus shifting from their family to his career. At first, Ava thought it was just temporary, just a phase. But as time went on, the distance between them grew. He was still physically there, still present for family dinners and the occasional weekend outing. But the emotional connection that once thrived between them seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Ava tried to ignore the feeling, refusing to confront the uncomfortable truth. She told herself it was just a temporary distance, a rough patch that they could work through. After all, marriages weren't perfect, right? Clara had been Ava's best friend for as long as she could remember. They'd met in childhood. Inseparable. Ever since, sharing everything from first crushes to late-night conversations about their hopes and dreams. Clara was the free spirit, the one who could make Ava laugh even on the darkest days. She was the friend Ava turned to when life felt overwhelming, and she was there for Ava when the weight of motherhood or marriage became too heavy to bear alone. But Clara's own marriage was crumbling. Ava knew her friend was struggling with her husband's indifference. Clara had confided in her countless times. Yet Clara kept her feelings hidden, putting on a brave face and pretending everything was fine. Ava never asked too many questions, respecting her friend's boundaries, unaware that beneath the surface, Clara's needs were growing. Needs she couldn't fulfill in her own marriage. What Ava didn't know was that Clara had started to look elsewhere for the emotional connection she craved. And the person she had chosen wasn't just anyone. It was Liam. As weeks passed, Ava began to feel the emotional void between her and Liam more acutely. She tried to close the gap, making more effort to reach out, to rekindle the spark that had once burned so brightly between them. She'd initiate conversations, plan intimate dinners, suggest weekend getaways. But each attempt felt like trying to hold on to sand as it slipped through her fingers. Liam's responses were distant, distracted, as though he was somewhere else entirely. He would nod absent-mindedly at her attempts to reconnect, his mind clearly elsewhere. It wasn't that he was rude, but there was a coldness, an emotional absence, that Ava couldn't ignore any longer. Still, she refused to confront it. She told herself that all marriages went through rough patches, that this was just another phase. She wouldn't admit that their relationship was falling apart. As Ava's frustrations with Liam grew, she noticed something strange about Clara. Their friendship had always been a source of comfort, but lately, Clara had become distant. She was less available, more elusive. The phone calls that used to happen daily now happened only sporadically, and when they did speak, there was a shift in the tone of Clara's voice, a hesitation, a weight to her words that hadn't been there before. Ava tried to brush it off. Maybe Clara was busy with her own life, with her marriage, or just dealing with personal issues. But something gnawed at her, an uncomfortable feeling that she couldn't shake. Then there were the moments, small, seemingly insignificant, that left her unsettled. Clara would offer strange half-comments about Liam, comments that seemed too familiar, too intimate. There was one instance when Clara mentioned how Liam had been so busy lately, but she said it in a way that made Ava pause. It didn't sound like something a friend would say about her husband. It sounded like something a lover might say. Ava could no longer deny the growing distance between her and Liam. The emotional detachment had turned into something far more painful. The late nights at work, the absences, the lack of affection, it all pointed to something more, something Ava was too afraid to face. She felt more alone than ever. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. And the warrior. Children brought comfort, but it wasn't enough. She needed Liam. She needed him to come back to her, to bridge the gap that had formed between them. But as much as she tried to hold on to the hope that things would improve, the evidence was mounting. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what. The signs were becoming undeniable. Ava had always trusted Clara, but now when she looked at the way Clara and Liam interacted, something felt off. At family gatherings, she noticed the lingering glances between them, the private conversations that were shared just out of earshot. It wasn't just friendly banter anymore. There was something more in the air, something Ava couldn't quite put her finger on. Clara was always present when Liam was around, a little too present. She hovered a little too long, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, leaned in a little too close when they spoke. Ava's stomach twisted with unease every time their eyes met, every time their hands brushed. She told herself she was just being paranoid, that she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The connection between Liam and Clara had shifted from friendship to something more, something she wasn't ready to face. Ava's heart sank as she watched them. She couldn't bring herself to believe what was happening, but the evidence was right in front of her. The intimacy between her husband and her best friend was no longer subtle. It was unmistakable. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the truth was slowly, inevitably crashing in on her. Ava sat at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly as her mind wandered back to the past few weeks. Something had shifted between her and Liam, though it was subtle at first. Small signs she couldn't ignore. The way he no longer made time for the evening walks they used to take. The late nights at the office, even though he'd insisted it, was just a temporary workload. But the emotional distance, that was harder to brush aside. She could feel it in the quiet gaps during dinner conversations, in the space between them when they lay side by side at night. He wasn't the man she had married, or perhaps he had never been the man she thought he was. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Clara's laughter echoing from the living room. She was sitting across from Liam, their voices light and easy, too easy. Ava's stomach turned, and she stood up abruptly, moving into the hallway to keep herself out of sight. Her best friend, the woman who had been there through every moment of her life, laughing with Liam in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate. The way Clara's eyes lingered on him, the soft touch of her hand on his arm. It all felt wrong. Ava's pulse quickened. She knew she was being paranoid, but her intuition screamed that something was happening between them. She wanted to brush it off, to convince herself that everything was fine, but in her heart, she felt the creeping ache of betrayal. Am I just imagining this? Ava whispered to herself as she pressed her palm against her forehead. She had always trusted Clara, but trust was a fragile thing, and now it felt like it might break at any moment. It was a mundane errand, picking up groceries for the week. But when Ava opened the door to her house, she had no idea her world would be turned upside down. There they were, Liam and Clara standing close, talking in hushed tones, their bodies angled toward each other with an intensity that sent a shiver down Ava's spine. Liam's hand rested on Clara's shoulder, a gesture so casual yet somehow too intimate. Their conversation was light, but there was something about the way they leaned in, the way their eyes met. Something that told Ava everything she needed to know. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. The weight of the moment hit her like a freight train. Ava stood frozen in the doorway, the grocery bag slipping from her hands and crashing to the floor, scattering their contents. Liam and Clara both turned sharply, their faces instantly twisting with guilt. But it was too late. The truth had already broken through the surface, and Ava felt every ounce of it, raw, suffocating. Ava didn't speak. She couldn't. The sight of them together, the betrayal, the connection she had never seen before was too much to process. She backed away slowly, her chest tight with shock, anger, and a deep guttural pain. She didn't know where to go or what to say, so she simply walked away. The house felt like a tomb. Ava paced back and forth in the dim light of the living room, her mind racing. She couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. She had seen it with her own eyes, but she needed more. She needed the truth. With shaky hands, she picked up Liam's phone from where he had left it on the coffee table. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt for invading his privacy. But it was too late for that. She had to know. Her fingers flew over the screen as she scrolled through his messages, his call history. The deeper she went, the worse it got. There were texts between Liam and Clara, flirty, affectionate, intimate. And then there were the photos. One in particular, a picture of Liam, his arm wrapped around Clara, their faces too close, smiles too knowing. Ava's heart sank as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just a fling. This was an affair. Months in the making. The clarity was brutal, and with it came an overwhelming rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. The life she had built with Liam, the friendship she had with Clara, all of it was a lie. She dropped the phone onto the couch, her hands trembling. She had always thought of herself as strong, as someone who could weather anything. But this was too much. She collapsed onto the couch, her chest heaving with the weight of the truth. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on Clara, who was sitting on the couch, oblivious to her presence. Ava had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, her body felt numb. "Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a blade. Clara looked up, startled. Her face shifted instantly, guilt flickering in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Ava, hey. I didn't know you were—" "Don't," Ava interrupted, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I know everything." Clara's face paled. "What are you talking about?" Ava took a step forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "The texts, the pictures, the lies." Her voice trembled as the words spilled out. "You and Liam, you've been sleeping together, haven't you?" Clara's silence spoke volumes. She looked away, biting her lip, but the guilt was too evident now. Ava took another step forward. "Why, Clara? Why would you do this to me?" Clara's shoulders slumped and she let out a shaky breath. "I never meant for it to happen, Ava. I've been lonely. My marriage, it's been falling apart, and Liam, he was there for me." Her voice cracked and Ava could see the tears forming in her eyes. "You've been playing me all this time," Ava whispered, her voice breaking as the weight of Clara's confession crushed her. "You were supposed to be my best friend." Clara looked down, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't stop myself." The truth hung heavy in the air between them. Ava didn't know whether to scream or cry. The woman she had trusted most in the world had not only betrayed her, but had also manipulated her vulnerability to keep the affair hidden. It felt like a betrayal of everything, of every moment they had shared. Ava's mind spiraled as the full extent of Clara's betrayal settled into her bones. How could she have been so blind? How could she have trusted someone who had been playing her all along? The memories rushed back. Every late-night conversation, every secret shared. Ava remembered how Clara had always been there for her, how she had confided in her about her struggles with Liam, seeking comfort in her best friend's advice. But now, she realized, all those moments had been twisted, manipulated. Clara had been feeding off her vulnerability, using it to hide her affair with Liam. Her heart pounded with the sickening realization that her entire friendship had been a lie. The woman who had always told her to trust her instincts had never trusted Ava enough to tell her the truth. Instead, she had built a secret world with Ava's husband. Ava slumped against the wall, her hands shaking. "I don't know who you are anymore, Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Clara stood there silent, unable to offer any excuse. The betrayal didn't just shatter Ava's marriage, it shattered her sense of self. She had to rebuild everything now, starting from the ground up. Trust was gone, her friendship was gone, and most of all, her faith in the life she had built was gone. She would never look at her past the same way again. The walls of Ava's life felt like they were closing in on her. She had always been strong. Strong for her children, strong for her marriage, strong for herself. But now, sitting alone in the silence of her broken home, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Her self-worth had been wrapped up in her marriage, in her family, in the belief that she was enough. But now she couldn't help but wonder, was she not enough for Liam? Was there something wrong with her? Had she been blind to the cracks in their relationship all along? Guilt gnawed at her insides. What if she had seen the signs earlier? What if she had tried harder, been more attentive? Maybe she could have prevented this. But deep down, Ava knew the truth. She was not to blame. This wasn't her fault. Liam and Clara had made choices. But the weight of their actions felt like a burden she could barely carry, and yet, amidst the chaos of her emotions, there was something else. Something darker, more powerful. A desire for justice. Ava didn't want to remain a victim. She needed to make them pay. She needed to take back control. Ava stood at the crossroads of her life, torn between two paths. One led to forgiveness, a chance to rebuild, to salvage the remnants of what she had once had. The other led to exposure and revenge, revealing the truth no matter the cost. The anger burned inside her, and the thought of continuing to live in the shadow of their betrayal felt unbearable. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't let them get away with this. With a newfound clarity, Ava made her decision. She would expose Liam and Clara for the liars they were, and in doing so, she would reclaim her power, her identity, and her life. The first step was about to be taken. The fallout would be inevitable, but Ava no longer cared. The truth would be told. Ava sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the evidence pressed heavily in her palms. She had carefully arranged everything, the texts, the photos, the timestamps. Each piece was a testament to the affair that had been tearing apart the life she once knew. Her heart beat erratically, not from fear but from an overwhelming sense of resolve. This meeting, the one she had orchestrated, would be the final act in a play she hadn't asked to be a part of, but one she would now take full control of. Liam and Clara, oblivious to what awaited them, would walk through that door thinking they could fix things, that they could ease their guilt with a few empty apologies. But Ava had no intention of letting them off the hook. She had spent months wondering why her world had started to fall apart. Tonight she would finally have answers. She took a deep breath, standing up and walking to the window. It was a quiet evening, the sky painted with shades of orange and purple, but inside, her heart raged. She was no longer the wife or the friend. She was the one who would expose the lies, who would force them to see what they had done. Liam arrived first, his eyes searching the room, noticing Ava's calm demeanor, but not questioning it. The tension in the air was palpable, but he was still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could repair the damage. Clara arrived shortly after, glancing nervously between Ava and Liam. She tried to force a smile, but it faltered under the weight of the atmosphere. Neither of them knew what was coming, but both felt it, a sense that something was terribly wrong. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," Ava said softly, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. Liam nodded, his eyes darting between Clara and Ava, clearly on edge. "Of course, we just need to talk, figure things out." Clara sat down across from Ava, her eyes filled with uncertainty, while Liam took the seat beside her. Ava's calmness only made them more anxious, and yet neither could guess the storm that was about to hit. Ava's gaze remained fixed on them, her fingers gripping the papers she had gathered. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but cutting through the tension. "Do you know what this is, Liam?" she asked, her eyes locking onto his, daring him to lie. Liam swallowed, his throat tight. "What do you mean?" Ava slid the phone across the table, the screen showing text messages. Texts filled with affection, longing, and an intimacy that no husband should share with his wife's best friend. Clara's name was in every conversation. Ava's voice was quiet but firm, as if each word was carefully measured. "I know about the affair. I've known for a while now." Clara froze, her face draining of color. "Ava, I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered. But her voice lacked conviction. Ava's gaze never wavered. "How long, Clara? How long have you been betraying me?" Clara shook her head, tears welling up. "It was never supposed to go this far, I swear." Ava's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You've been betraying me this whole time. Every smile, every word you ever spoke to me, it was a lie. The dam broke." Ava's voice trembled with a raw, painful anger as she continued, her words coming faster, more furious. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To our family? To our friendship? This was supposed to be my safe space, my life, and you've both torn it apart. You've ruined everything." Her voice rose, the pain and fury evident in every syllable. "I gave you everything, Liam. I trusted you. And you, Clara, you were supposed to be my best friend. How could you do this to me?" Liam remained silent, his face crumpling with guilt as Ava's words hit him like 1,000 blows. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He couldn't apologize. He couldn't even defend himself. Clara, on the other hand, tried to justify herself, her words weak and rehearsed. I was lonely, Ava. My marriage was falling apart. Liam was just there for me. We never meant to hurt you. Ava stood up, her voice seething. Don't you dare. You knew what you were doing every step of the way. You played me. You knew my vulnerabilities, and you used them. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Clara's face flushed with shame, but she still clung to her excuses. I didn't want to hurt you, Ava. I swear I never wanted this. Ava's hands clenched into fists. You've hurt me more than you can ever understand. As the confrontation reached its peak, the power dynamic in the room shifted. Ava, once the victim, now stood tall, unwavering, her voice a weapon of truth. Liam, paralyzed by guilt, couldn't speak, couldn't defend his actions. His silence only made the situation worse, a reflection of his shame and regret. Clara's attempts to defend herself fell flat, each explanation sounding more hollow than the last. You don't understand, she tried to say, but Ava was having none of it. No, Ava interrupted, her voice cold and controlled. You don't understand. You ruined everything. And you think you can talk your way out of it? You think your apologies can fix this? It's too late for that. Clara's face crumbled, the truth of Ava's words cutting deep. She had been exposed, her lies laid bare. There was no escaping it now. Ava's final accusations were the hardest to voice, but she knew she had to say them. She had to make them feel the weight of what they had done. You didn't just betray me, Liam, she said, her voice trembling. You betrayed our family, you tore apart the trust we had, and you, Clara, you were supposed to be my friend. You destroyed that too. I gave you everything and you stabbed me in the back. Her heart broke with each word, but she wasn't going to back down. I trusted you both, and you shattered that trust in the worst way possible. The room grew heavy with the weight of her words. Ava's chest heaved with the emotional toll of the confrontation, but she knew she had to. Let it out. She had to make them feel the full extent of their betrayal. The silence that followed Ava's accusations was deafening. Liam and Clara sat there, still as statues, unable to respond. Ava stood tall, the storm of emotions inside her churning, but not breaking. Her heart was broken, her world shattered, but for the first time in months she felt a strange sense of peace. She had taken control. She had exposed the truth, no matter how painful. But what now? What came next? Could her marriage ever be saved? Could she ever forgive Clara? She didn't know. But as she stood there, her chest still heaving with the aftermath of her words, she knew one thing. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. Ava's heart still thundered in her chest as the door slammed shut behind Liam. The confrontation had ended, but the chaos it unleashed was far from over. Her world felt like it had crumbled into irreparable pieces, each jagged shard a painful reminder of the betrayal. She'd never felt more alone. Liam's desperate pleas echoed in her mind. He had begged, pleaded, his voice shaking as he repeated how sorry he was, how much he loved her, how he never meant for it to happen. But Ava couldn't listen anymore. His words were hollow, empty promises she could no longer believe. You can't fix this, Liam, she had whispered, the words cutting her throat like shards of glass. The finality in her voice was something even she hadn't expected. She had given him everything, and he had shattered it with one selfish, reckless choice. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from him, unread and unwanted. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. "Please, Ava, don't leave me. I'll make it right. I swear I'll make it right." Ava's eyes blurred with tears. She wiped them away harshly. No. She couldn't let him back in. Not after everything. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but beneath it was something darker. An overwhelming sadness. She'd given her heart to him, trusted him with everything, and he had broken that trust. Now the pieces of her family were scattered, and there was no way to put them back together. The silence in the house was deafening. Ava stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the cup of coffee in her hands, the steam rising in slow spirals. She was numb, but underneath that numbness a terrible weight pressed down on her chest. Her marriage was over. She could feel it in her bones. The betrayal, the lies. It had all led to this point. How could she ever look at Liam the same way? Again? She could still hear his voice, trying to apologize, trying to convince her that it wasn't what she thought, that Clara had seduced him, that he was weak. The excuses kept coming, and Ava shut them out. There was no room for them anymore. The lies were too deep, too ingrained in their lives. Her children had heard the raised voices. Ava hadn't wanted them to, but they had. They always heard things, always felt the tension in the air. They were too young to understand what was happening, but Ava could already see the cracks forming in their innocence. Could she live with that? Could she destroy the family they had built for the sake of her pride? She glanced at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces frozen in time, unaware of the storm that was coming. How would she ever be able to look at those photos again? Could she ever have a normal life after all this? Clara hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Ava to confront her like this, with the cold precision of someone who had been preparing for the storm to come. When Ava had shown her the evidence, the texts, the photos, Clara had thought she would faint. There was nowhere to run, no excuses to hide behind. But even then she had tried. She had tried to justify everything. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she had said, the words coming out in a shaky whisper. "I was lonely, Ava. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage." But Ava wasn't having it. The way Ava had looked at her, broken yet somehow stronger than she had ever been before, was something Clara would never forget. The guilt clawed at Clara's chest, leaving a deep, raw ache. What had she done? What kind of person had she become? She had never intended to hurt Ava, but that's exactly what she had done. Now Clara was left to face the consequences. Liam wouldn't talk to her anymore. Not that she blamed him. She had ruined everything, not just with Ava, but with herself. What was left for her? The shame and isolation grew like a cold shadow, creeping into her every waking moment. She had lost a friend, a marriage, and her own dignity. There was nothing left but the endless echo of her mistakes. In the days that followed, Ava's mind was consumed with thoughts of what had happened. She had expected to feel relief after exposing the affair, but instead, there was just emptiness. She had destroyed her family, torn apart the person she had been for years, and now she didn't know who she was anymore. She stared into the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her face pale, drawn. How had she allowed herself to be so blind? How had she trusted so fully, only to be betrayed so completely? But even as the questions swirled in her mind, something inside her began to stir. She had been broken, yes, but maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild herself. She wasn't just Liam's wife or Clara's friend. She was Ava, and she could learn to stand on her own. She started small. She took long walks by herself, breathing in the cool, fresh air, She reconnected with old friends, people she had neglected while she had been lost in her marriage. Slowly, the pieces of her life began to shift, though the scars would never fully heal. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Ava began to find her footing again. Letting go of the past had been harder than she could have imagined, but it was necessary. She couldn't keep clinging to a future that no longer existed. It wasn't just about moving on from Liam or even from Clara. It was about moving forward from the lies, the shame, and the hurt. Ava realized that forgiveness wasn't something she owed them. It was something she owed herself. She couldn't allow their betrayal to define her, and so she began to build something new. It wasn't easy. There were days when she wanted to crumble, days when the loneliness and doubt crept in, but Ava refused to give in. For the first time in years, she had the chance to decide who she was, to reclaim the power she had given away. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, piece by piece, day by day. As she sat in the quiet of her apartment, Ava looked out the window at the setting sun, a peaceful warmth beginning to settle in her chest. She had been through hell and back, and yet, here she was, stronger than she had ever been before. Confronting the truth had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it had been the only way to reclaim her life. The affair, the lies, it had all been a painful chapter, but it was a chapter she had closed. Ava understood now that the power to heal didn't come from anyone else's apology or regret. It came from within. The betrayal might have broken her, but it had also revealed her strength. The scars were there, yes, but they were hers to carry. She wasn't the same woman she had been before. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She would never again let anyone diminish her worth. And with that newfound resolve, she looked toward the future, a future that was hers to shape. Ava sat motionless in the dimly lit room, her eyes fixed on the crumpled photograph in her hands. The smile in the picture, so vibrant and full of life, mocked her now. It was a snapshot of a time before everything had changed, the before she knew the truth. Her fingers traced the edges of the image, a painful reminder of a love she thought was unbreakable. The weight of betrayal still pressed on her chest, suffocating her. Her mind wandered back to the confrontation, the gut-wrenching moment when she'd finally faced the truth. Liam and Clara, her best friend, and her husband, the people she trusted, most in the world, had betrayed her in the cruelest way imaginable. But as the initial anger began to fade, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge. Exposing the truth, painful as it had been her only way out of the prison of lies they had built together. She had felt trapped, suffocating beneath layers of deceit, each lie a silent dagger to her heart. She couldn't keep living like that, suspended in uncertainty, constantly questioning the reality of her life. The truth hurts, but it's the only thing that can set you free, she realized. The pain of betrayal was still raw, gnawing at her, but now she could see beyond it. The truth had shattered her world, but in doing so, it had opened her eyes to the possibility of something else. Something real. Ava's mind turned to Liam and Clara, their faces flashing through her thoughts. Their choices weren't made in a vacuum. They had been driven by their own emotional voids, their need for validation, their weaknesses. Liam had always been the one to promise her the world, but in the end, he had sought something outside of their marriage. Something that felt easy. Clara, on the other hand, had never fully understood the boundaries of friendship and loyalty. Her own emptiness had led her down a dark path, betraying both Ava's trust and her own moral compass. But what had it really cost them? What had their selfish decisions done to their lives? Ava could see the regret written all over their faces, but it wasn't enough. Regret didn't undo the damage. They had lost their connection to her, their bonds now irrevocably broken. For Ava, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about the way they had both chosen to abandon her for something fleeting, for their own selfish desires. The fallout was bigger than their betrayal. It was the ripple effect on everything that had once been whole. Her pain was theirs now too. She could see that in their eyes, but it was too late. The damage they had done was already beyond repair. In the days following the revelation, Ava grappled with the immense weight of her new reality. It was like stepping out of a fog she hadn't even known she was trapped in. She had spent so long denying the truth, convincing herself that everything would be okay, that the love they once shared could be salvaged. But now, as the reality settled in, she understood the depth of her own denial. The affair wasn't just an accident, it was the result of years of neglect, emotional disconnection, and lies. The truth stung, but as it settled into her bones, she began to realize something important. Only by embracing this pain could she move forward. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like she was walking through a maze of broken dreams and fractured relationships. But she knew now that growth was born from this pain. In the rawness of the truth, she found clarity, strength, and for the first time in a long while, a sense of control. Ava's journey wasn't going to be easy, but she accepted it. The truth had set her free, even if it had taken everything else to get there. As the days turned into weeks, Ava began to feel a new kind of strength within her, a quiet, unyielding strength that she hadn't known she possessed. The weight of betrayal no longer consumed her. She could feel the tight grip it had on her loosening, replaced by something much more powerful: self-authenticity. She was no longer defined by the pain of her past, by Liam, by Clara. Ava knew now that she had to move forward. No more clinging to the ghost of what could have been. No more waiting for apologies that would never come. She would rebuild herself, piece by piece, without the crutches of false hope or self-pity. And with that, she closed the chapter of her life with Liam and Clara, no longer looking back with regret but with a firm resolve to move forward with her life, no longer tethered to the chains of her past.